What we're doing here is we're going to be talking about DMS capability that we did for our client L Ryan.
Okay, so let me share my screen. So you just mentioned DMS. So DMS is our term for delivery management system. It represents a set of systems that have the intelligence of planning routes. So we have things to deliver. In this case, Orion has orders, custom orders to deliver, or orders to be picked up from the vendor, as well as returns on both sides. And so, given a set of orders and a set of criteria like opening times, the capacity of a vehicle, the availability of a driver, the DMS then takes all of that input and effectively comes out with a route plan that says, okay, pick this order from here to that place, and the driver can execute that just like, we're used to the drivers delivering things at our place. They all use some kind of DMS to help them plan their days. Ryan uses LogiNext. Part of the reason why they chose LogiNext was its capabilities, the strength it has in the domain of this kind of real-time planning. And so they use NetSuite as their ERP system. And the request was, well, how do we connect these two worlds so that NetSuite drives the delivery management system? This was a conceptual picture. I believe, Marty, you drew the first version of this, and we
Yep.
iterated on it a bit. The most important things in their case, they use Magento as their order system. So really, the orders start off in the Magento, which is where the customers interact directly, and the orders flow into NetSuite.
Yep.
And so would have sales orders, and in a lot of cases, they're actually ordering things on demand. So when the sales order comes, it triggers a purchase order. And so the idea is that we want to be able to plan this. So all the orders ready for planning. There's a whole rich mechanism in NetSuite that gets an order to a state where we say now this order is ready to be planned. If it's a sales order, that means it's ready to be delivered to the customer, or purchase order is ready to be picked up from the vendor. These all come into a couple of searches. We chose to drive this process using saved searches because we realized that it would be important for the team to be able to tweak parameters and to kind of shape it. And so we didn't want all the logic to sit in code.
Yep.
So we have a few searches that drive the process. And so ultimately, those searches point us to the orders. Based on that search, the script then goes in and pulls the parameters it needs from the orders and from really wherever it needs to in NetSuite to shape the data in a way that LogiNext understands. That's really what we're doing. In a sense, we're doing a mapping exercise here, if you look at it at the most fundamental level. So we're mapping NetSuite orders into a DMS order, which is what LogiNext expects and what LogiNext knows to plan with. As part of that, we need information about the drivers because in LogiNext, the drivers have an app where they can say if they're available, if they're on break, and all those parameters. So we actually have some input coming in to help influence that. And so giving the orders and giving the drivers, we then create these DMS orders, a mirror or representation of what's happening in the LogiNext world. We don't sync things back from LogiNext, but instead we use the DMS order as our bridge into the LogiNext world. So it has an ID that helps us know which order it is in LogiNext. And then ultimately, we're using LogiNext APIs. We make a route planning request. So we pass in the parameters, which include the IDs of the orders that we created earlier on. And then LogiNext goes and does its thing. And then now it starts giving NetSuite responses. There's a whole LogiNext works using webhooks. It's a very common pattern in this kind of systems, but in modern software systems in general. So LogiNext is telling us what's happening. So in the case where we make a route planning request, it's going to come back with a route planning request REST notification that tells us either it was successful, and so these are the trips, or it failed, and this is why it failed. So what NetSuite does from that point on is really responding to those webhooks, a separate script, processing these webhooks as they come in sequence, because the sequence matters. We have to first, for example, process the route planning request before we start handling pickup or delivery notifications that come from that. So there's a notion of queuing things up and doing them in the right order so that there's integrity in the system. So effectively, we have this queue of requests and we process them, and that does different things in NetSuite, updating order states, creating transactions. Like it's a whole rich system here. Depending on the webhook, the actions we have that happen in NetSuite will be shaped accordingly.
Okay, I'm following. When you supply the DMS order, that's the information that you grabbed about the sales order, which is a fulfillment request, and the
Right,
purchase order, which is a pickup request.
right.
You're pulling that all together to feed the LogiNext API. This concept of an order is a bulky enough amount of data about a number of pickups and delivery requests. Does it have that much girth in it in terms of multiple lines of addresses and things like that that it needs to go to?
Right. Yes, that's correct. I should mention here that we wouldn't typically plan the pickups and the deliveries together. That's a bit of a business decision
Oh,
because also the way the business works, usually pickups happen first in the morning. We go pick up, we get them ready, and then later on we deliver. But on LogiNext side, they have this notion of an inbound order and an outbound order, which we then map to pickups and deliveries. So effectively, we are translating that into LogiNext terms and making the request. And
okay.
it does contain things like lines. They don't call them lines. They have this notion of cartons and things. But effectively, you can map an order header, the address information, the line information, and of course, the key thing is the address, which might be free format text addressed or the latitude, longitude, which then
Got it.
they can use
Got it.
to plan.
And you said you had the driver profile that is part of that order because you're saying we expect that driver to be the one that's going to be performing the work.
Potentially. So we could target specific drivers, but really what LogiNext prefers, and that's the general idea here, is we don't want to be too rigid. We want LogiNext to have as much freedom as possible. So effectively, we're saying we have these orders and we have these constraints. Constraints include driver availability, but we want to give them a pool of drivers. But at least we want to maybe say only the drivers in this region, because it doesn't make sense for someone in a different city to be considered for orders here. The key thing we're trying to do is not to be too rigid. So we don't want to say include exactly this driver. Ideally, we want to say these are the availability, the time in which we can deliver or we can pick up. These are the drivers in the pool. And then another constraint we also need to consider is vehicle capacity, for example, because we have different vehicles in our fleet. And so each driver is attached to a vehicle. LogiNext knows that. And so part of what we are translating is saying, which drivers qualify? What are the attributes of this order? So some of them might say this is a bulky item. LogiNext knows then bulky item. I need to take into account what vehicle and all that stuff. So we're giving it
Okay.
constraints and letting it do the work.
Further, though, the concept of the vehicle was our concept of using a bin to be able to say what that attributes of that vehicle are, because
Right,
we're creating the business transactions behind the scenes based on what the results are to move the inventory to the proper vehicle
right,
when it's in our warehouse.
right.
Correct? So the DMS is helping us understand which vehicle is going to get what this constitution of mini orders are producing.
Yes, that's correct. So the vehicles themselves are modeled as bins. We model those transfers into the bin in case of a customer delivery. The first step is we get the bin, the items from the warehouse into the vehicle. And then at the end of the day, of course, or as the driver is delivering, we're also modeling that transfer of the goods out of the vehicle bin. And then typically at the end of the day, when the trip ends, if there's anything that didn't get delivered, we bring it back again into the warehouse. So there's all these bin transfers
Yes.
happening at different points.
Okay. And this client chose to use a model where one vehicle goes out in the world and picks up stuff and brings it back to the warehouse. Another
Right,
vehicle comes to the warehouse to pick up the stuff, loads it up to take it out to the customers, correct?
right. In the most basic case, yes.
But in theory, a one model could be go pick something up and
Right.
drive over and drop it off without bringing it back to the warehouse. But this client chose not to do that. But we could have done a model like that.
Indeed, yes. LogiNext supports that. And I think at a point, if we did experiment with it, for efficiency, I mean, this idea of just pick up, bring to the warehouse, do some work and take it out is the simplest model. But then for efficiency reasons, there are times when you don't want to do that. Right now, we're considering scenarios where, well, the driver might already be on the way and an order comes in. And we know that it's reasonable because we know where he's going and where the order should be delivered to. And so we're thinking of concepts where we could actually dynamically add things to a trip or dynamically add, go pick up something on the way because we just got an order and we know we need that
Okay.
item. So there's all that capacity. But right now, we kind of are keeping with the simple model of, one
Oh,
one step out, one step in.
but I could see the power of once you've got the basic communications and all the record systems going, that you could now collapse time by
Right,
having this intelligence about pickup and delivery more closer to real time. But it's a lot more communications that would have to happen, I would imagine. And so
right,
LogiNext has its own client app
right,
that they leverage, which allows them to understand, like we might be using Google Maps or Waze. It's sort of
right,
similar sort of thing, just instructing them how to move through through the route, through the city, through wherever they need to go, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. They use LogiNext app, and it helps them, like, collect signatures, indicate what they've delivered. And sometimes in the economy where the client is working, there's a lot of cash-based transactions. So in some cases, actually would also help them know how much to collect from the customer and record that, so that that comes back in, and there's a whole clearing process that happens in NetSuite. So
Okay, this is pretty rich. Okay, so I do recall these concepts, and we did this implementation as early as I believe 2020. We're now
right.
5 years into the implementation. Their business has really grown, and now they're looking at these optimizations. Um, what you would you say there is something to demonstrate? Because this is a powerful sort of thing that we could write up on, but
Right.
but it's demanding.
Right. Yeah, we could look, and I can show the whole flow now because it's not so easy to set this whole thing up in Sandbox. But we could just go in, for instance, and look at the queue. We could see what's happening in real
Okay,
time. You can see here there's an event. These are coming from LogiNext, and each one of them then determines what the payload is. So effectively, based on the event, we interpret the payload, and then we decide what we need to do. So in this case, we started a trip. That means we had a successful route plan. It said these are the trips I want to be on that route, and these are the orders on each trip. And then we created those trips in NetSuite, and then made a request to start the trip. And then LogiNext will respond with a confirmation that the trip has started, would be trigger us to do other things. Of course, you see then who the driver is, and it kind of ties the words together for us and allows us to do our work in NetSuite. And then after the trip starts, then the driver picks up something or delivers something, depending on what kind of trip it is. And there might be exceptions, in which case we'll see a failure, and we're just basically handling these webhooks. Well, let me just open one of these so we can appreciate this. Just JSON payload. So there you go. So in this case, we got this is a trip started webhook. The first type is trip start. So here is going to give a list of the shipment IDs. These are the orders from NetSuite that are on that trip. So I can tell quickly that all these ones here with the 250 are sales orders, and there happens to be one PO on this trip as well.
I see.
And then it tells you something about the branch, a reference to the trip, and the delivery medium through the driver. So this tells us this driver has that ID. So we can this
There's a,
allows us to tie the two
we have a
together.
cross-reference table or something that holds that all together, so you understand that long string represents a driver.
Right. So we have a driver record, and each driver, once we sync them to LogiNext, we store their ID in NetSuite
Got it.
as
Okay.
an external ID. So once we get back, we can look up the driver based on
Okay.
the ID.
And here I didn't expect to see a PO when I see all the sales orders, given the logic you said. Why is it
Right.
PO in the middle of this?
Yes. So this again, where the business makes the decisions, they could mix them up. In this case, it could very well be that they decided for some reason to have a PO on the trip. I wouldn't normally expect this. Like usually it's either customer orders and return RMAs, or POs and VRAs. But again, the business, because we allow them to do these safe searches, they could go in and make a decision and say, I want this order to be on included in the route plan. So I can already tell that this is also a bit of an exceptional order, because when you have these extra characters, that means this was a user initiated plan. Often this happens when they're trying to recover from something,
Yep.
and that might explain why it's not typical, right?
Is it okay for me then to talk a little bit about the technology elements and
Right.
infrastructure?